So what else is being said, Steve, about your football team is that you're losing a tremendous amount on defense in particular. The front seven's been loaded, the cornerback position, Jordan Lewis in particular, Shannon Stribling's been an outstanding performer. Those guys are gone. Wide receiver, you lose the two playmakers you had on the outside. What is really concerning you about trying to make up for these losses?
Well, I think we almost have to do away, unless you are a purely developmental program, and there's some really good developmental programs that play at a high level. Wisconsin might be as good a developmental program as there is in the country. You could say Sparty might have been until last year's implosion. You look at Navy, Air Force, Georgia Tech under Paul Johnson. There's a lot of really good developmental programs out there. And I think when you are a developmental program, and what I mean by that is a 3-star is a recruiting coup for you. I think the recruiting services, Mark, especially ever since ESPN got involved and put serious money into it, these guys, if you look at the NFL draft every year, they do a really good job with every year looking at who the top 250 to 300 players in college football are. They're as good at that as they've ever been now. But when you get beyond that, who really knows who the 47th best right guard is to the 69th? Do you know? No one knows. And here's why you don't know. That's a developmental guy, meaning that the certain things have to go right for that potential to be unlocked and to be tapped. And he's got to overcome intangibles like academics, family issue, girlfriend issues, coaching changes. And those things impact 4 and 5 stars too. It's just they're bringing an athletic package to the table that gives them more margin for error than a developmental guy, So that's when I say developmental program, I mean a program who relies on cycling up with those guys that they take 2 to 3 years, building them up and getting them ready to play as redshirt sophomores and juniors, as opposed to the programs that are recruiting at such a high level that they are playing young guys every year. You go back, Michigan's last on Phil Steele's experience chart, it was last year? Ohio State was. The two teams that played for the national championship, Alabama and Clemson, were both in the 100s on Phil Steele's experience chart. And last year in the playoffs, all 4 teams played at least 9 true freshmen, and they all started a true freshman on the offensive line. So certain programs are recruiting at a different level than others that are more of the developmental programs. And so when you're not a developmental program, and Michigan's not anymore under Harbaugh with the way he's recruiting, you got to take the returning starters numbers and chuck it. Because everybody keeps throwing around, they got 5 returning starters. Well, Mark, they got 9 other guys that started a game. So let me give you an example. Taco Charlton was hurt for about 3 games last year. Chase Winovich started those games. At the end of the year, Chase Winovich ended up with 8.5 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. Now, if he was a full-time starter, those numbers would have probably made him honorable mention all Big Ten at the end of the year. But because he wasn't a full-time starter, he's not even counted as a returning starter this year. You look at another young man from Michigan like Josh Metellus, who had to start the Orange Bowl for Jabril Peppers when he was hurt. So let's say your returning starter metric is, did you start at least 3 games last year? Okay. Well, let's say those 3 games were Central Florida and Hawaii and Maryland. 3 games Michigan won on average by 50 points apiece. Now, what is more important, playing in those 3 games or starting the Orange Bowl against Florida State if you're Josh Metellus? I'd rather have the experience against Florida State in the Orange Bowl. So I think you got to take the returning starters number for some of these programs that have a lot of depth, that do a lot of recruiting at a high level. And I think you got to throw it out the window because I just don't think it matters as much as it does for a purely developmental program like in Iowa, like in Wisconsin, etc.
If I remember correctly, I checked out your podcast a couple of weeks ago in which you projected the percentage of likelihood that Michigan would win each game on its schedule, and you came out to an 11-1 record. And again, you were not necessarily making a prediction on each game, but you were looking at the likelihood of a Michigan outcome as a victory against that particular opponent. So that said, Steve, I
think it was 10-2. I think it was 10-2 actually.
Okay, with a possible Penn State loss. Well, they're all possible losses, but a probable Penn State loss and maybe Ohio State.
I think I had Ohio State 50-50, and I think I had Penn State favored against Michigan is what I had. Yeah.
You got to go to Happy Valley, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, definitely. So
yeah. So so let me take another team in the Big Ten. All right. Let's say Penn State has 3 returning starters on the defensive line, and they're saying Michigan has none. But two of the guys Michigan has returning are Rashawn Gary, who's going to be a first-round pick in 2019, maybe the #1 overall pick in the draft, and Maurice Hurst, who's going to be a first-round pick probably in next year's draft. Would you rather have Penn State's 3 returning starters, Mark, or Maurice Hurst and Rashawn Gary? Which package would you rather have? That nobody's counting those 2 guys as returning starters. That's the point that I'm trying to make. I think everybody in their right mind would rather start with Maurice Hurst and Rashawn Gary on the defensive line than Penn State's 3 returning starters. See what I'm trying to say? That's the point I'm trying to make.
And I think you picked the position that it makes the most sense to go against the returning starter statistic, because defensive line, as we all know, both of us know from watching football 30 years ago, that you lined up with 4 guys, your 4 best guys, and they played every down. And now you need 7 or 8 or 9, and you rotate those guys. So coaches have determined at those type of programs where they can get 7 or 8 guys that they can trust, that the next best guy that's 3 to 5 to 10% less of the starter is a fresher, better player in the fourth quarter or in particular spots than the starter. Therefore, the starter statistics, yes, it's minimized in regards to its importance for particular programs, i.e. Michigan.